people, both on council and also on the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition, where she was co-chair. A non-traditional role for women. So she's a groundbreaker. She also is a feisty person. We love that about her. Yes. I'm going to have Delaney Young is going to come and give a little introduction, welcome us from the Telluride Town Council. Telluride Town Council. We're really proud to have her here. And we also have Telluride Institute, Dan Collins is our president, Lori's on our board. We have managed to get Regina to join our board as well, so we're really proud of that. So please, Delaney, you want to come up and say just a few words of welcome?
I wrote this thinking that we would be outside, so bear with me. I don't know if any of you were here when I'm referring to. I remember being here 2 years ago for the dedication of the plaque and the celebration of the healing relationship that had begun between all of us. I remember thinking what a perfect place this was to celebrate that healing. The stories that were told, the sound of the wind through the trees, the sight of the wondrous colors and birds in flight, all of these contributed to a sense of peace that was and still is necessary for our relationship of healing to continue and to thrive. I remember the gratitude I felt to be included in such a beautiful experience. I am even more grateful to be here today, and I am honored to be asked to speak to you. It is my sincerest hope that we, all of us, remember everything, all of it. I believe it is through those memories that we will all find the path that we strayed from or were forced from long ago. And I wanted to end with a quote. Healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls your life. That is from Akshay Dubey.
Thank you. Those were wonderful words and an absolute wonderful memory. I can remember being here 2 years ago as well. And right now I would really like to ask each and every one of you to accompany us out to the memorial site there and share with me a moment. I'm just going to burn a little bit of sweet grass, which just is to show gratitude and honor and be thankful that we're here today. And I think that's something that many times we, in our busy lives, forget to take time just to be gracious about even the simplest things, like putting one foot in front of the other, taking a simple breath, and being thankful for those who came before us. And I remember standing here a couple of years ago and hearing the drums and the songs that were sung here reminded me that it had been many generations that song and drums were heard up this valley, and how sometimes our ancestors long for that. So, just taking a moment right now, I'm just gonna, I know you are already quiet, but let's just, for a few seconds, stand in silence. To our Mother Earth. And right now is a beautiful thing happening, which is the rain, the clouds. I think for many of us, the summer was a reminder of how welcome the clouds are today. We all went through some really scary moments with the fires, and we were praying that moisture would come and help us. And when they did, they were very welcome. So just taking that moment and being gracious and showing gratitude through celebration, which is why we're here this weekend. And we do need to remind ourselves that through all the good, the bad that happens around us, that we should always remember to take a moment to celebrate and be thankful, because we are in a very, very wonderful place, a very blessed place, and for my people, very special. Mountains are everything to us. So thank you for sharing a moment with me. And I do always stop. I do take a moment.
As I spoke out there, I think we have been striving to achieve small steps, and each year it feels like those steps are just a little bit bigger and a little bit long-standing versus where we started from. And one of the things that, as a former elected leader of my tribe, I get to sit back now as being a former and really revisit a lot of things and see how they were before, how it was when I was serving my people and community, but how it is today and how much and how far we've come. And we've approached a lot of the challenges. I know that Art had spoke to many of us many a times about what can we do, how do we approach this. And I remember that the initial steps in leading to where we're at today were really strongly focused at one small aspect of Ute people. And as I began to get to know Art, I said, Art, you know, a Ute's a Ute no matter what band you're from. And because at all times, Utes were known for movement dictated by season, by use of the land and what available resources were out there. And so just because we may have been in one area for one season, maybe things weren't quite as healthy in what the land was providing to the people to use, we may have gone to another area where we roamed at. So encampments could have been here a year or two, and then just to let the land heal and grow back. We might not have visited one area based on available resources and based on season. So when we began to engage in these conversations, and this is something that I always bring to light, especially with a lot of the work that I did on Bears Ears. When a community comes to an area, and if nobody's there, does that mean that they didn't live there or it wasn't inhabited at any time? No, it depends on what season and for what purpose. And what did the land provide that was lucrative in that area. And so when we talk about Ute people, we had in those very early times, we had our own sense of economy. And the economy consisted of the game, the animals, and what we did with the hides, how we provided for our family. And as we began to come into contact with the outsiders, and that started the initial contact from Europeans were the Spanish, and then were also the Mexican from South America. So we were actually under other governments prior to the federal government. And the Ute people had another change in our economy, which was people, slaves. We were either a slave or we actually had our own slaves. And this is how we've seen economy in terms of Indigenous people change and shift. It went from land use, it went from resources that were available, and then it went to, as people began to introduce themselves into our culture, that then we began to use even people, women specifically, because why? Women can do and conduct things. Great homemakers, later on, the females became great textile makers. They also could work the hides that the men would bring in, so that the economy consisted of a lot of different things. And women became a big commodity. As we moved on, later on in years, different things began to change our indigenous economy. We already had these things. So this always tells me that when people think, and some of those myths about indigenous people being savages, a civilized people do not establish an economy. So we think about things like that, and so I think along the way we get mislabeled, we get misidentified, and we're largely in part misunderstood. And even currently into our contemporary times, we still continue to be misunderstood, which is why conversations like this are so important. I have to tell you this little story. I recently finished working for the Ute Indian Museum just a few months ago, and was there close to about a year. And it was interesting because I had a lot of people come in and want to sit down and talk with me, and Durfee was one of them who frequently came and chatted with me, and many others. But there was one individual that came in, and he challenged me in a way that made me think about what I do when I conversate with people and why I do it. They called me from my office and they said, "Regina, there's somebody here that would like to meet you, so we'd like to introduce you to him." And I said, "Sure." I came up in my bubbly little self and I said, "Hi," and he introduced himself and said he was an archaeologist. And so I said, "Okay, my name is Regina Lopez White Skunk. I'm a Ute." That was the only thing I could say, compared to an archaeologist, what do you say? I said, "I'm a Ute." And he shook his head and he said, "No." And he said his name again. And he went on to say, "I'm an archaeologist," but he had a little bit more sternness to his voice this time. And I didn't know what to say, so I took one step forward and I said, "Hi, my name is Regina Lopez Whiteskunk. I'm a Ute." He shook his head, didn't shake my hand, and walked out of the museum frustrated.
Wow.
I never got an explanation. I never seen him ever again. But that led me to believe that discussions and gatherings like this, how important they are. Because if I don't help people understand my people, how do we move on and evolve to a better place than someone holding over their level of education, their status, whatever it is that they may have over another human being? And did that affect my self-worth? No, that just lit my fire. But I'm thankful for those moments because it helps me to approach conversations like this. It helps me to bring forth a better understanding and education to people in general. It did hurt me a little bit. I did go back to my office and shake my head and think, well, what just happened here? And I thought, well, he said his name, he's an archaeologist, and he probably had some fancy 3 letters behind his name. And so I thought, well, how can I tell this story to people that would help them to understand why I do what I do? Well, I have 3 letters behind my name too, and it's UTE. And if any of you have been to the Ute Indian Museum, CJ, the museum director, has this really nice banner in the Chipeta room, and it says UTE, Understanding Through Education.
Nice.
And so those are the 3 letters behind my name.
Beautiful.
But we're here today to have a discussion, and I gave you a little bit of a background of kind of how I see land use, and I know Dan has mentioned something about water and quality of water and how we use this. And he also used a term, indigenous knowledge. And that's an interesting term because I love the whole thought of that, but what I like to talk about is indigenous living knowledge, because our indigenous knowledge is handed down from generation to generation. And when my grandmother or my mother or father hand down some knowledge to us, those people have a heartbeat. They have a mind, they have a spirit, they have an existence in the present. And so when we think about that exchange of knowledge, it's living. When we think about what the anthropologists and the archaeologists and anybody with the ology behind their names studies, they study a past life. They study data that they collected from a time that existed before many of us. And so it's important to include the living in the indigenous living knowledge. And that's what makes us a little different. Is one more valuable than the next? I don't think so. It's just the collection of data here. The way we collect it is through years and generations of experiences. The whole collection of that and stories being told to us. And the person that's telling it to us is living, breathing, and has a heartbeat. And probably means something to us in terms of personal relationship. So with that being said, is there any dire question that you all may have, or how we can, because I really want this to be a nice dialogue, and we'd like to be able to share, but before we do this, I better take care of protocol here. I've got to give respect to my tribe's elected leader and his wife. We've been joined by Chairman Harold Cutt here. And his wife, Juanita.
One of the questions and things we heard last night when Roland spoke was about the name Ute, and how that wasn't really the name of the tribe. It's not your name, and certainly he said it was a different tribe's name for you.
So Ute actually is, and if many of you have studied what language, the root language that we speak is termed Uto-Aztecian. So we're actually identified probably because of the first contact from outsiders were from down south. And so we probably, because of the language similarities and whatnot, that was a way that people like to latch on to identifiers. Along with that, when you use the word tribe, that was never a part of our people and identification either. That was a political term coined by the federal government in how the indigenous people were to be divided and identified. And so the Ute people as a whole, we have bands, and those are small collections of families that relatively bands, which one includes like the Uncompahgre, Weemanooch, Mwochi, Capote, Uinta, White River. These are small grouping identifiers. But when the federal government came in and they said, we're going to do this, they identified us in terms of tribes very similarly to the way they have identified other animals in tribes, in smaller groups. So we technically, and that's why a lot of tribes have chosen to go away from the term tribe and utilize nations as theirs. We don't see ourselves quite as a nation. We would probably rather be known as, in our language, we say Nooch or Noochu, which is the people. I think that's a common interpretation in any indigenous language identifying the people themselves. So it's far from Ute, isn't it? How they got there, no idea. But so somebody's seen a similarity, and so it is not our choice. And a lot of times we are tagged with things that were not our choice, like along with reservations, not our choice.
So we just have been people who adapt and people who just have to make do with however, whatever. But we are very, very resourceful, so we use what we have. And a lot of times, we're not going to make a big deal about it. We just do what we do.
Well, along with this naming, of course, it's a very powerful kind of thing that we do when we name something. And when you're talking about the difference between a reservation and a nation, let's say, or a people, there's issues of sovereignty that come into play that I think are incredibly important. And so I know there's a shift in my mind that happens when one moves from the idea of a reservation, where you sort of put a people, let's say, versus acknowledging the sovereign character of a nation. And I don't know if that's the right term, nation, but it suggests something different in my mind.
Well, when you come into the conversation of nation, and let's say on an international basis, then it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at what Indigenous people are, that are listed on a federally recognized roles under the federal government, then it makes sense to be considered a nation. Because on the international level, a nation-to-nation discussion makes sense visually, as well as in terms of how one interacts with a different nation or country.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sometimes hard for the United States citizen, the normal citizen of a small community, to understand how do Native Americans exist almost with dual citizenship, because that's what it is. It is dual citizenship. We have our own, as members of our tribes or our nations, that is a sense of citizenship, and then we also are American citizens. So that is hard for people to understand, that we have that. It's even harder for our state legislatures to understand that. Because in terms of how we operate as federally recognized tribes, we engage in conversation with our states out of courtesy. Because we have the opportunity to just go straight into our nation's capital and conversate and make certain requests of and at the federal level. So with all the work that I've done with Bears Ears, out of courtesy to deal with the state of Utah, that was out of courtesy. So when we reached our threshold of conversating and saying, okay, you guys have disrespected us, you've disregarded our meeting requests, you have not given us the opportunity to speak, we don't necessarily need to stay engaged in this conversation, which is what we did. We turned the conversation straight to the executive branch and pursued and lobbied President Obama's administration for designation and protection of the land. That is hard for people to understand, that Indigenous people who are on the federally recognized roles have that opportunity. We also have other opportunities that we can enjoy, which is we have access to funding sources that states and counties don't, because of that relationship. So we were being, largely in part, when we come to the table, we bring other resources sometimes that local communities don't always have access to.
Can we explore this idea of sovereignty a little more? As we were walking in, we mentioned to each other the possibility of deeding physically this monument, this space of ground, and back to the Ute people. I'm playing with this idea, which is related to your mentioning of movement, that the trail systems that remain and exist, I think, are important to find, document, determine as best we can what they are and where they are. But the idea of that I've been mentioned to you as well on a couple of occasions, that is to find a piece of ground, and deed it back to the Ute people for uses as they see fit, if it is something that they might like, but that it becomes sovereign to them, whether it be ground from the BLM or from private ground that might be found on the Uncompahgre, principally, the trail system, basically from the Dolores into the Uncompahgre River in Kelowna, as I understand. That idea of sovereignty, I'd like, does it extend to such isolated pockets if they were available and determined to be available? Is it something that you think that might be attractive, whether it be a piece of ground here that is symbolically given back, or physically in a 3-acre piece of ground or whatever?
I think that's a great thought, and you're not the only one who's asked this question. I mean, there's various spots in Colorado and communities that have asked the same question. But the challenges are what type of land it is. If it's a part of federally controlled lands, that would be a bigger conversation, which entails a huge, complicated process in trying to achieve that. But if they're private, then I think that that's a different way that would entail a different process. And how the challenge is too is that you're not dealing with one tribe, you're dealing with 3 tribes. And so if you were to deed back let's say 3 acres out here, how would that work with 3 different tribes?
Mm-hmm.
That would be a challenge. So I don't know what that would include in terms of how could you do that with 3 different tribes, with two in state and 1 out of state? So there would be some maneuvering and some trying to figure out how that could be done, because you'll have an exchange. Well, who will that exchange go to? What does that look like? Anything that's outside of our reservations, the federally designated reservation boundaries for each tribe is trust lands. And so if we were to receive something like that were directly, let's just say hypothetically, let's say you deeded it to the Ute Mountain tribe. In order for us to bring that into trust, that would be a very long process. So there's a couple of different things that are very complicated. Don't happen overnight, actually happens over a few years in process. But that's typical of federal, anything that's federal. So it's a great thought. I think that we'd have to get real creative about how we design that to take place.
I would, in my mind, I'd have 3 pieces. If we could establish it as a viable idea for the Ute Mountain Ute in an area that is where they're young and their proximity could participate in, and another over on the Wiminouche coming from another side, and be able to establish the idea and to accept the fact that it's a 5-year process. It's all right.
And I think too, part of that discussion, and one of the great things is having relationships with key decision makers in the communities. And one of the things that I have recognized spending some time on this side of the mountain is that there are people who are very accountable for their actions today and want to be a part of that shift and change. Mm-hmm. So to create some of that, who do we need to contact? Who do we need to pull into these conversations? But from a very grassroots effort We need to say we acknowledge that this happened, good or bad, whatever that may be, but this is the type of change we want to see. And I think that affecting change in how we think that conversation as people by making sure that we are active in the public comment periods for these different places. I know for a fact that the forest plan for a couple of forests have come up in the area, the region. We need to be active on those levels. We need to be prepared to engage in conversations with our state legislatures. And my biggest thing, and I encourage to inspire each and every one of you, is to get those state legislatures into our neighborhoods and on the ground. The best way for them to know how important these places are, to whether it's yourself in this current time or to the past, is bring them to these trails. Let them fill those trails.
Could you clarify something? So if there's a piece of private land that we want to belong to your band of people, that's not just between us and you, it involves the feds?
No.
Oh, good.
That's one thing. What involves the feds are the federally controlled lands, like anything that's BLM, anything that's public lands, basically, the forest, some of the forest. It just depends on what those are. Now, granted, there's some that are state protected, so then that's it would be a different. So we have to, one of the things that we have a hard time with as Indigenous people trying to decipher in conversation is land status and control. Because traditionally speaking, in our way of thinking, we don't own the land. We have never owned the land. If anything, the land owns us. We're the ones who take care of the land. So the whole concept of ownership and possession was nothing of our concept in our traditional ways and thinking and protocol. So all of this that we have today has been taught to us. So we do our best to navigate those conversations. And they're very complicated. When it comes to land status, we try to decipher this. And Chairman can kick into this, what the different conversations that we have, because sometimes it's going to be at a federal level. Maybe something else is going to be at a state level. But one of the things that people forget is that because of the state of Colorado being historical territory of the Ute people, just because we don't own it or possess it today, some people put us out of mind, out of sight, out of mind, and don't engage in our conversation. Or that we may have direct ties or resources that we formerly used from those areas. Remember, I said we roamed in season, depending on resources. We weren't always there, but we could have been there at different times. And so we always, because of where reservations are at today, and the arbitrary lines and wall, that's why I always laugh. President Trump wants to put a wall on the south border. Well, we've had arbitrary walls for generations. Some of us have been so good we stayed up behind them. But see, we have those, so we get forgotten. We don't get engaged on a lot of different levels.
You know, I wanted to just honor Chairman Telluride and his wife. I mean, I'm really deeply thankful that you did that, and I do apologize that we didn't invite you, and we will do that next year. But my understanding was that when even private land was given to a tribe, it had to be under the trust system, which is the federal government. And so the federal government does have a part to play, even when you donate private land to a tribe. And then if it's federal land, it's even more complicated. Is that a fair?
Well, it's got to go, it can exchange, it would become property of the tribe, but then the tribe would then have to bring it into trust.
Right.
So it's easier said than done. So, I mean, I can give you a piece of land as a private citizen.
Yeah.
But if you give me something back to the tribe, then it would be on our part to bring it into trust.
Oh.
Which, you know, to to even start to fathom that conversation, equate it to a monetary value, you're looking at least $1 million just alone in trying to get it to a point or more. And
Yeah, the
that's,
process with that private land is much easier than federal lands like the BLM National Forest. Then the tribe has to inquire for those lands, if, you know, if it's going to be given to the tribe, that they go, there's a procedure that we have to go through. Like there was a BLM land that was within our jurisdiction nearby the reservation line. So we just inquired it, and then they allowed to give it to the tribe. And it was a small, maybe about 40 acres or so. That became tribal land. But then, you know, sure, if you're going to donate your property, sure, we'll take it. You know, because it all goes back to the territories that the Ute people used to have, and this is a part of our territories and our ancestors that was once here. You know, they migrated through these mountains, and that and that's one thing that I guess we don't respect. You know, we take it for granted, and that you know, the way I see it is that Mother Earth provides for us, gives us strength, but then we take it for granted, and it's just like with this infrastructure that's sitting there. You know, where do we get the lumber? From the timber from Mother Earth. And a lot of the stuff that we take for granted and we don't give back to Mother Earth. And the water we drink. We take it for granted being, you know, a long time ago that, you know, I grew up with my grandparents. We had to get, you know, we get buckets of water. We didn't just turn it on, you know what I mean? And the way they taught me about nature, what to respect. And now I guess I live it, you know, I see it that way. And there's a lot of things that you look at it that way, and that we take it for granted. And, you know, I say that in Indian country, and as I'm talking to some of the people there, and I said, you know, Mother Earth provides us with strength. Don't forget that. The water we drink. And so.
I've always thought it was fascinating when I learned, it was only a few years ago, after living here for 30, 40 years, that there was a huge difference between Southern Ute Nation and Mountain Ute Nation because of Ignacio and his refusal to accept the allotment system, and so that the land on your tribe, your nation, is owned communally, and it's not checkerboarded like in other places.
And also that, you know, some of these towns and some of these trails and you know, it's just the way that non-Indians interpret it. But then it's got a Ute name too.
Maybe we need a Ute map.
Yeah.
I love that. I would really sincerely love to know what the Newt calls the river here, and the mountains, and the valleys, and
We said I'd probably have to go back and speak to our elders, because Roland was one of the ones that said that a lot of these areas have Ute names, and it's just the way it's interpreted by non-Indians. But we'll have to go back there. That'd be interesting, you know, because a lot of us younger or newer generation don't seem to, you know, they need to understand that too.
yes. I also think it would be a great resource for your people, because I know that, you know, the maps are sold here locally of all the mountain ranges and have all the white people names on them, that it could be a funding resource. And I think it would do really well.
A lot of these areas where, it's got herbs out there that Native Americans use, and that heals them in that way. And there's other things out there that you want to be able to not designate any kind of trail. You just, you got to respect it, and, the people that lived here before.
Yeah.
I'm working on a project right now right on the border, southern border of Arizona. Most of you know where Douglas is, in the southeast corner of Arizona. Right across the fence, and there is a big steel fence there, is Agua Prieta. And so I'm talking with some of the Hispanic community down there, and they're saying, it used to be that there was no fence, and these were families, and they were on both sides of this arbitrary line. And the thing that was most profound that they said, and we share an aquifer. The aquifer connects these two communities, that the water, Mother Nature, let's say, is the connector there. And it's just this arbitrary political boundary, which doesn't make any sense at all, culturally or environmentally.
And so a lot of times how we've been raised and how, the Utes are hunter-gatherers, which is why we move according to what is offered to us by Mother Earth, by the land. So the way my grandmother always talked to us about it, she said, it's like our Mother Earth goes like this. If you see it in here, then you can help yourself, but you don't take more than you need. If you can see it, and it's coming, and it's there for you, you may use it. But if you have to dig for it, if you have to barrel into her to find it, then it was never for you to take in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that belief in us, and so even at that we have unwritten understandings through our indigenous living knowledge. This is what grandmother told us. This is how it was explained to us, and a lot of times these stories are told to us in our language. Some of us understand it, but as the generations are moving forward, that is getting far few in between, and that's a resource that's getting lost. So sometimes we have to go to things like this. Some of the younger generation does, but I do want to talk about some of what this book is, and this is a very special book to me. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass, written by Dr. Robin Wall Kimmer, who's a Native American. But she talks about the relationship between her formal education as a botanist. She's a Native American who is well educated in traditional botany as well as others, and she describes some of her initial first days in school when she signed up to be a ethnobotanist or to study ethnobotany. And it's very similar in the way that many of us approach things and conversations, and this is one of the reasons I identified with it. Was for starters, she was a female, and then secondly, she was very, very well driven about what she wanted and what her desire to get out of this was going to be. But because of outside forces that were kind of dictating what she was going to do, she was told that she will start in a certain level at a certain point. And she said, okay, if that's what I've got to do to get here, then I'll do it. But she did. But as she moved along, she began to braid in what was her traditional knowledge. And she learned about, or she started to see the similarities and was able to test some of her theories about maybe why was this plant not growing, but yet I can plant something of my native culture, and I do it in the way that I've been taught to. I feed it, I treat it like a child, I grow it, I'm thankful, I share gratitude for it. So she's got this relationship with what she's doing on a traditional aspect, but she's done everything according to the way maybe a florist will do. Just water it, leave it, move on. Nothing very intimate about the relationship with this, what she might have done here. So she sees that the relationship with a living life, culture, whatever that may be, intertwined with it, does have something to do with this, how things grow and what things are done. So a lot of our living, indigenous living knowledge is valuable in so many different ways. There's many different layers, spiritually, physically, and even we were probably one of the earliest scientists here. We were probably the early, what do you call it, when we watch the stars? Astronomers, yes. Because if you go out into the canyons and you look at some of the petroglyphs, a lot of those are going to be depicting certain cycles of the moon. They're going to tell of different constellations. But likewise, too, we were the ones who also documented trail systems. I know up Shadow Valley, there's a specific panel that if you take that and overlay it over a topo map, it actually will show you the trail system that the game followed and later became trails of the people. So, you know, there's all these different connections and all these different ways that tell us that our indigenous living knowledge played key roles in who we are. Again, I'm going to go back to the conversation. Does it make this any less valuable than those who studied for 12 or more years to have nice little letters behind their name? We might not have been able to document per black ink on white paper, but we documented on the rocks. And the only way those will come down is if somebody physically goes out there and destroys them, which is happening.
You know, one of the things I found most powerful about that book was that she didn't put down Western knowledge and she didn't put down Indigenous knowledge, but she honored both of them. And I thought that was a very powerful statement.
And I think that kind of speaks to events like this. I'm not trying to make myself or my people any different from other people, but what I want people to understand at the end of the day or at the beginning of the morning, we are all human beings. We all occupy the same space. We just might use things a little different. We might define things a little different. And maybe the history of this spot may have been when this community was established, but the history of my people being in this valley, there's nothing here that says a specific start date. We've just always been here.
I have just a comment, because I'm so interested in this. It's been said that you know, trees talk to each other. This was understood in indigenous cultures that you had a relationship. There were relationships that existed in these organic ways. And only now are we in science, you know, learning that the structures under the ground, the connections that trees have to each other, that when one is needing some juice, the tree that has an abundance can feed it some, and there are these connections to plants. Such a mystery. When I heard that, why do trees talk to each other? How can they do that? And it's often said that Native people have relationships with mountains, that there is a way of communicating with mountains, and I'm mystified by it. I know that it is based on a relationship that one must have with that mountain in some way. But I would be curious how you were taught, how you were informed about being able to have that relationship with the mountain, and what is it that it says to you, and what do you say? How is that communication established, and what is it you get out of it? Can you help me?
I get $1 million every time I come to the mountain. you know, growing up, my experience specifically, especially to this area here, my great-grandfather was actually born just on the other side of Ravenna, on the Disappointment Valley side there. My great-grandfather was born there. My father was born on the south side of the Ute Mountain. So for me, these are two important people in my life where I know where they came into this life at. I have a relationship with this land. When I come into these mountains, I honor that. And I'm grateful that they were, you know, provided the time on earth here with my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was a medicine man. He was a person of the land who raised my father. And so, you know, these are key points. And I'm very grateful. I show a lot of gratitude. But these are also places where I've traveled extensively and lived out on the plains, and believe me, there's no better place to be home than in the mountains. But you know, when I do fly home, when I come over the crest and I see the Rocky Mountains, I have a sense of ease. I have a sense of I can breathe. Get me back into the high altitudes, and then I really can breathe. My senses are they're alive. They can get and replenish, and I get revitalized from being in the mountains. So I always have to come, and I always have to put my feet down. But these are things that aren't necessarily taught, but they're even harder to demonstrate or communicate what that is. So I know I fumble over a lot of my thoughts and trying to speak them in English, but it's such an incredible experience for me that I probably don't have the right words to express that. But you know, what we did a little earlier to be able to just stand for a little while quietly is how one starts to develop those relationships, and how those relationships may be aren't always going to look the same. Mine may be very different from yours, may be very different from his. And each one may be based upon family, maybe individual specific moments. It's a very individual thing. But we are taught to have relationships with different things. Whatever we may be engaged in, whether it's ceremonially, maybe one goes without something to be grateful for it. And I say that in direct relationship in a sense of fasting, participating in a Sundance where you go without. So you develop these relationships through a sense of absence, then you become grateful. And you become aware of a sense of being. It's interesting because when you look at water, you look at land, you look at animals, on the United Nations discussion, a lot of countries have given those specific things human rights. And I was always curious as to why the United States will not do that. But we're supposed to be a very civilized nation and developed nation. But the Native Americans, we don't need a recognition on any level to acknowledge that, because we do give these things that right and acknowledgement, and we establish relationships on that.
Yes.
Probably very similar to Southern Ute. Ours on the Ute Mountain Reservation, we have a preschool, and we do have people that come into the school there to help teach the children the language. But we don't have a charter school. We bus our children into the RE1 school district, into Cortez. So they're not getting that opportunity that the two other reservations provide to their students. And it's not, the language aspect of it is just not on the level of the state bringing that in, but we did develop a curriculum regarding history. The language piece is something that will always kind of elude us. But it's always interesting though, because in some schools and on some college campuses and universities, native language is taught as a foreign language. So I still don't see, but that's not for me.
There was, wasn't there just a conference in the Southern nation of youth language speakers? I read about it in the Drum. They just had a gathering of youth speakers, and so there are groups of people who are working towards trying to preserve the language and educate others, as I understand it.
And also going back to the connection part about the mountains and stuff like that, is that it's just like each of us, we have that own being, who we are, and that's the way the mountain is too. It's got, it's got its ways of being the mountain, and, showing your respect towards the mountain. Say you're going to take something from the mountain, so you would say, offer a prayer, or just say, I'm going to take this. And it's a lot of times you go, to these different areas that, you kind of feel like, whether or not you're going to be safe. And the way to do that is, you would offer, like, put some crackers down or whatever, and say, and talk to the mountain. And that's the way it's usually done too. And then, when you go out to these different areas, and you would offer it to the ground, and that way you'll take care of you.
Another thing is, can I say something?
Okay.
About what you said,
Mhm.
I'm not a member of the Ute tribe, but I'm from the Navajo tribe.
Mhm.
And yeah, a lot of what we taught is from our grandparents. And like you said, how you said the mountain speaks to you, how do you,
Mhm.
there, how we as Native people have that relationship, we know where to go for these things. And that's probably where, to me, maybe that's what you meant. How does it speak to you? How do you,
Mhm.
what relationship you have there with Mother Earth? Like we said, everything here is from there, and we're taught to respect that. And with my teaching from my grandparents is, my grandma, she was she made herbs for healing medicine. She was out there, she knows where to get it. And that's just in the mountains too, or just on the plains, whichever one she's going to use for just what she's going to, that purpose of healing that's going to be. And she offers a prayer with our corn pollen, and then puts it there, and then that's when she takes it, that I'm using this for this purpose. And
That a lot of the responsibility gets shifted to the school systems, whether it's a charter school, whether it's a private school, or the public school. The language seems to be shifted, the responsibility for teaching it seems to be shifted to those systems. When actually, she brings up a great point. If you're not waking up to the language, listening to it and speaking it, and where's that at? That's at home. That is the first classroom. So to shift responsibility to a school system or a mechanism of teaching it isn't going to be the same as it would be if you woke up to it, if you're hearing it in ceremony. Because in ceremony, it's a different language. There's a whole different language. There's certain terms, there's certain descriptions of processes that can only be spoken in the language. It doesn't make it an interpretation to English. Because in English, you're taught to have a single word for book. It's a noun. We're going to describe it as that thing with many words or something.
Yeah, right.
We're gonna take it and it's gonna become a phrase, rather, it's gonna be described about what it does. Maybe it's a book or something that speaks. It's gonna say something, so it's not one single word. So a lot of stuff that we try to take from English into our language sometimes ends up being a whole 2 breaths, where it was meant of one right here. So there's that difference, and so how it's taught, where it's taught at, is a big difference. And I think that countries like New Zealand, who had the native people who had to revisit and regenerate their language and culture, and how they did it was through immersion. What is immersion? When you wake up to when you go to sleep. So they were getting it every which way. They were getting it within their cultural events and ceremonies and whatnot. That's the really only true way you can actually get a language to that level. So these two, one is Navajo, one is Ute. I'm confused. she might get up and get after me in Navajo, and he might get after me and what do you do? But I mean, in our neighborhood there, we did have a generation of people who could speak both fluently, and a lot of that generation were fluent in Navajo and Ute before they were ever fluent in English.
One of the things that bothers me a lot is that there's so much still racism and discrimination that ongoes. I know Roland talked about it last night, just some small things, but deeply hurting, or like the experience you had, just, talking about this archaeologist. I mean, I'm sure you all experienced this, so the difficulty of trying to bring that into our system with all its complications, all of its paperwork and things is really hard. And even on the reservation, it's not easy to set up a charter school.
Well, I can answer some of that. After serving on the council, we started early on developing, or the conversation to develop history within the 4th grade system for the state on the state level. So I had the honor to work with the State Department of Education over the past several years. And we actually just had finalized and finished and presented it to the leaders last week. So there is a history curriculum that is available through the State Department. But again, it's going to go back to each individual school board. So if there is anything that you all can do, you can start talking to your school board members and selling this. And at any time, if you choose to get a hold of me and I can help this conversation perfect. But I'm praying, keeping my fingers crossed. I'm hoping to see Montezuma already wants to adopt it and incorporate it into the school system. So in some ways, we're at the tops. In other ways, we have a little bit more complicated system.
Would the Colorado Commission on Indian Affairs, Ernest House, and those folks, would they have this curriculum?
You could probably get a hold of them.
Yeah, you probably could go through Ernest, although he's leaving, but at least through the Commission on Indian Affairs.
There's a curriculum up at the Montana school I'm working with that is online, and the school district has an Indian education coordinator, so-called, and so she's helping to coordinate the introduction of some of these curricula. There's a story writing curriculum in history that
actually,
I'm
we got a hold of when we were developing this. We actually got a hold of Montana had an excellent one. I think Wyoming, Utah had something in place. So we just pretty much tried to reach out to the different states within the region here to see what they were doing. So we did our homework and we tried to figure out the best process to get to where we needed to. We also worked with a lot of the elders groups on the reservations, and then just incorporated a lot of historical information that the state had in the archives too. So we did our best.
That sounds
4th grade
great.
right now, and then the next challenge will be, I think, 8th grade. So we're going to try to take this one where we can, and then continue to develop the next one, the 8th grade level.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for doing that. It's an essential element for the healing process is honoring the truth of our shared histories. And so we can move forward together. Like, thank you for.
And I think the most valuable part of all of this and of our discussions is to acknowledge what happened, whether it was good or bad, but to make sure that we create a better tomorrow by putting our best foot forward. And the only way that we're going to do that in this day and age and under this administration is together.